Hey, everybody, welcome back to yet another edition of the Security Repo Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dwayne, and we'd really appreciate if you like, subscribe. Please tell your friends about this, especially your non-security friends. We think we have a lot of great intro information for people that are interested in security, so please help us out by spreading the word. This week, we have a really awesome guest. I've known him for years. Matt Glaman is an experienced software engineer and a prominent member of the Drupal community. He has over a decade of experience in web development and has gained a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this field. He's an author of several books, including Drupal 8 Development Cookbook, Drupal 10 Development Cookbook, which provide comprehensive guides to building and customizing Drupal sites. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, man, I've known you for quite some time because we were both in the Drupal community about a decade ago when the Drupal 7, Drupal 8 transition.
Yeah.
And unlike a lot of our guests on this show, you don't have security in your title, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right on. But you do have a lot of experience with static code analysis.
Yes, that's how I made my little niche for myself in the Drupal community.
So for those of you who don't know out there, there is a tool called PHPStan, which, is a static code analysis tool. And you have extended that to the Drupal world into something called DrupalCheck. So maybe for the folks at home that aren't familiar with static code analysis, maybe you could just start super high level and just give us a quick intro.
Yeah, for those who work with Go or C, like those are compiled languages, but languages like Python, Ruby, and PHP, they're scripted languages, so they basically get compiled when they are run. So there's no error checking until you actually execute your code. So static analysis tools allow you to review your code before it compiles. So it helps do the job of the compiler to find bugs before you run them. So PHPStan is one of the tools that's available to do static analysis of your PHP code. So you can find errors or put in other code sniffs or code rules of your own to follow. And then years ago, I was looking into it, created PHPStan Drupal, which was the extension. And by that, also another tool, DrupalCheck. And that allowed all the Drupal developers to start doing static analysis on their Drupal code. The big catch was first finding deprecations. So that way, when you did a major version upgrade, you didn't get caught with any dead code. You could fix and adjust before you found bugs in production.
So that's an interesting thing to say, because I don't think there's a lot of people outside the Drupal world that understand this concept of version deprecation. So Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 was moving from a very specific way to treat PHP code to object-oriented and rebuilding the basic foundational blocks. So it was a major effort to go from 7 to 8 was a complete rebuild, which is unlike pretty much every other technology I've experienced out there in the world. And then they did it again with 8 to 9, not as major a foundational shift. And it just every version, now it's kind of backwards, just looking compatible, right?
Yeah. I would say 7 to 8 was like a replatform of sorts. And 8 to 9 was we're still getting our hands on this whole, you don't have to replatform for every major version upgrade. I find it comparable to React Router. For those who've jumped from 3 to 4 to 5 of React Router, for me, it seemed like each one, you had to rewrite how you did your implementation. There wasn't no soft deprecations, like a full rewrite, where otherwise there could be hey, we deprecated this in 2.1, and in version 3, we're going to remove it. So you had a few minor releases to go and adapt along the way. And besides just docs, there's some kind of runtime code that yells at you in development mode. Basically, it says hey, by the way, you're using something that's going to go away, so you don't need to fix it immediately, but it will be there to remind you.
So if I have a claim to any kind of contribution to Drupal, I did the Drupal 8 and the Drupal 9 readiness checks, where I took DrupalCheck and ran it against the entire ecosystem, just because I was curious, what's ready, what's not. I started building PRs out of that and trying to help people guide them to hey, be aware these major deprecations are happening. So without you, I would never got a shout out from the stage at a Dries note. Dries, the founder of Drupal, he does an annual main stage presentation. So I got a call out from stage because I did the work using your tool, and just thank you for that.
Yeah. And what's really neat is that did spur a bigger moment where now Drupal core and every single open source project that runs on Drupal.org gets scanned via PHPStan for static analysis and deprecation checks. So every bit of Drupal code is going through some kind of qualification in that regard.
That is awesome. That's got to be a proud feeling to know that you were like literally driving that level.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, like, just stepping way back. So why static code analysis? Like, why is this became your passion?
Yeah, so it all started. I was at a company, Centauro, that built the commerce module that turned Drupal to an e-commerce platform, and it was we had a lot of rules we had to go through of one secure, like building secure code, building optimized code for performance. And we realized there's a lot of repeatable things that we kept finding and needed to educate folks on. So like, oh, could we codify this into a tool? And that's where it wasn't like we couldn't use this like a code sniffer for like, oh, did you indent your code in the right positions? Because you need to have like a smarter context. And that was what led me to find PHPStan and kind of start building off of there. So we used it to build some of those rules to help us optimize our customer code. But it also then took on a different life of its own too.
So I'm curious on that. So you say like classic linting tools weren't serving the purpose. So what is the difference between just like a indentation check and a code analysis check? Is it just the context?
Yeah. It's the context. Like PHPStan, it can know the return types from like a method and then all the methods returned in it. Like it is able to go inspect. Say it tries to run your code as if it was running. But for PHP, there's the PHPCS code sniffer. It reads one file. And if you're calling another function, it doesn't know what that function returned. So it doesn't do any type checking. So I guess that's the biggest difference. Like a code sniffer can check like really basic things in a file, but it doesn't do any type checking. So an example of like where the static analysis helps with secure code is Drupal has a really robust caching layer. Like it has essentially a variation cache for rendering and also like response caching. So there's a rule that is actually in a draft PR that checks for your cacheability. Like, did you accidentally mark this as never cacheable, or do you have an instance where you're forgetting to add cacheability? Because you could have a security gap if you make a page too cacheable, because it could show, let's say, authenticated user data gets cached for anonymous, and that one user's output is for the rest of the world to see.
That is a serious danger out there. I know that's something that data loss prevention people like freak out about. It's like, how could you possibly show someone else's data, someone else's information to a not logged in user? That's a pretty big no-no.
Yeah, and this can help make sure that you attach. So those rules are in flight. They're not yet available, but to help ensure that you put the right, we call it cacheable metadata in the Drupal world. That's like the context and any other information to help ensure that it's granular enough and the cache is only used when it's supposed to be.
So I'm curious, where do you hit the limitations with this? Because the world is broken up into a bunch of type of testing: dynamic application security testing, or code testing, dynamic testing, static testing. A lot of different kinds of vulnerability testings out there in the world. Where are the limits of this? Where do you think, like, at what point do you think, hey, we definitely need to go over and actually look at the running actual site now?
Yeah, I would say the hard part is this emulates running the code. And that's the best way to put it, because PHP is a scripted language, so it doesn't get compiled until it's actually executed by PHP itself, like by a web server executing it or the command line. So it can do high-level checks, and it is really robust and smart, but also there could be flaws in PHPStan's interpretation. There's constant patch releases that fix the signatures and a few quirks here and there. And also there could be bugs in PHPStan Drupal itself, like the bridge code that says, here's how you interpret Drupalisms, like things about the Drupal platform to make it compatible with static analysis. So it's never going to be 100% perfect. So there could always be flaws, but it is that great first guard. The way I think of it is like your dynamic testing, you're relying on humans to still catch items and identify things, but there's things that we miss. So I like to think of it as a feedback loop, right? Okay, static analysis set our baseline. We found something in dynamic testing. Can we turn that into a rule that's in code so that way we catch it again in the future? And kind of like that feedback loop. But the dynamic testing uncovers things you missed with your tooling. That manual step goes back into the automated, and that helps catch any human error in that manual step.
I like that's a good way to think about it. I like that. A lot of the times I talk to people about testing, and human in the loop, or thing that the tool's actually doing is assisting the human with the job, doesn't enter the conversation all the time. So it's really just great to hear that. So on top of all this, you are an open source maintainer. Like, I think we all are if we have code on GitHub, but you actually have a project that you have contributions to. People are opening up issues. What's that been like?
It's actually been really fun. Because it's a chance to. I don't know. I remember when my first patch got merged, and I was like, "Oh, I just contributed to something bigger than myself." And it's always neat whenever there's that first contributor, and you get to empower that little bit. And I also like to think of it as a way to help level up other developers. Like if you're getting contributions from like an associate or like mid-level developer, you can say, "Hey, actually, here's how you write better code." Like, "Hey, I won't accept this until we make these improvements." So I see it as like mini mentoring sessions almost. And I hope people who contribute feel that way too when I do kind of nitpick and poke at things. But it's like I want to try to hold my project to a level, but I also will try to communicate with the other with the contributors so that way they understand they can grow themselves. So I've always found that is the most rewarding part.
What have been the biggest surprises organizing an open source project?
Just how willing some folks are able to jump in. Like I had out of the blue, this first time contributor wrote a whole bunch of new features recently, and I was like, "Oh, what?" And it was like high quality too. Like it didn't take a lot of work, and I was like, "There's one like quirk," and I was expecting it to be they threw something big here. It looked good, but it needed little tweaks, and then it would just kind of sit. But they were just like, "Oh, great, you have feedback," and they just worked on it. Because that is one of the drags sometimes of being a maintainer. You get something that's 90%, and the person contributing doesn't have the time or the will to land that other 10%. So I always get that was a really big surprise whenever I get somebody that's willing to go through the motions and bring it to the completion.
I gotta ask though, is AI helping or hurting you at this point? Is it like, are people opening up vibe coded PRs at this point for you, or are you using AI to like anything filter this or
So
condense things?
I have not, but I guess I'm lucky enough that like my packages are a bit niche. Like I can't imagine what it's like if you're like a JavaScript package maintainer. Like I'm sure that's larger. I actually did use Claude to help write some private rules for PHPStan, and I was actually pretty blown away at how well it worked. I reviewed the code, and it caught things that I usually even forget to fix when I write my own rules by using the APIs inside PHPStan properly. But I haven't gotten a lot of pull requests in that way.
Well, I think that's a tribute to how good the documentation is around this stuff.
Yeah.
Like PHP has been around a long while, and all the tools have been around a while, and Drupal has been around a while. Like the more documentation there is, the more there are good use cases, the more there's good code out there for anything, the better these tools can like reflect that back at you. I think that's the biggest problem with the JavaScript world is like how much junk JavaScript is on the internet. Well, that's called the internet. That's what it got trained on.
I mean, to be fair, PHP's got a lot of good examples of SQL injection. With
Fair
so
enough.
like, yeah, but I guess that's also the big part. It's like you always have to trust you have to manually review what's given to you because you never know. You never know.
So, actually, speaking of problems with PHP and Drupal, we're both old enough to have lived through that event in 2014, Drupalgeddon. For those of you who do not know at home, there was a major security hole that was found, a 0 day that was discovered in Drupal. Won't go into the full details here just for sake of time, but it was so severe and affected every single version of Drupal out in the world. We called it Drupalgeddon because it might as well be the end of the world. But the security community, being what the security community is in Drupal, they had that thing patched, like available within 12 hours. And I know people that had it patched like an hour after that and across their entire organization. So when people came flying in and saying, "Hey, we got to patch this thing," it's like, yeah, we already took care of that because it's Drupal and we already know what we're doing. I'm just curious your story on that. Like, where were you when Drupalgeddon happened?
I'm actually quickly double checking. All right, so and when Drupalgeddon came out, I was at Gaggle, which is an ed tech company, and they were launching a software as a service website for K through 12 schools, and we had about 500 sites running on the platform, and that was my instance of getting to learn how to on the fly patch via SSH. So we worked with our sysadmins, and they're like, "Hold on." It was actually the first time I saw a curl URL pipe get apply, and that's how they just like we scripted that to go bulk apply to our various doc routes. So we had it the fix out within about 15 minutes or so, because we were able to just iterate over every doc route, apply it on the fly, and be good to go.
Right on, man. So for those of you, I'll give you some homework out there. Won't read all the rules to you, but just Drupalgeddon, look it up. It was a major event that I think everyone above a certain age in Drupal had to live through. So I was just curious there. Well, man, it's time to get to that part of the show where we ask all of our guests the same questions. We want to get to know you a little bit better, not just the funny, quirky stories, but what's your favorite overall command line tool? Could be security, could not be security. We normally ask people security, but since you don't have security in your title, we'll let it get just broad.
Oh, you know what? It's BAT, actually, BAT, and it's like a version of less that adds color coding. It makes it really easy to go review files a lot more easily over the command line. Like I just install like brew install BAT every time I set up a machine, just so that way I can go view files a little bit easier and search files a lot easier while in the terminal.
Cool. I've actually never heard of that one before. I'm going to go and play with that after this. So you have had a number of jobs in your career. What is the best overall interview question you think you've ever been asked?
So this one goes way back. And the question was, explain the process of typing on your keyboard into the browser and the web page loading. Something of that sort. But it's because it lets you go very high level or low level. Like I took a kind of like broad approach, like, oh, you take the keys and it puts the input and the computer translates it. Like you can really know a lot about a person, how they think. Like they could just say, oh, well, they could focus on what it's like when the browser makes a request to the web server, or just focus on the server side. Or I give like the example I heard is like somebody went like super technical on like how a keyboard works and into the browser and like was very thorough at each step. So I always kind of like that because it just lets you kind of know where a person's head might be sitting and how in depth they go. Because sometimes being super in depth isn't always great. So you can be like, oh, well, you got really focused here. Let's consider like for the role if that's too much, or oh, that's like perfect for this because that dedication to detail.
I can't hear how a keyboard works without seeing Ben Eater's explanation of literally how a keyboard works using an oscilloscope, like showing the signals that get sent over serial, which is blew my mind when I saw that. It's free on YouTube, Ben Eater. If you haven't seen his homebrew computer stuff, it's kind of mind blowing. He just made sound work for the first time on his little board. It's fantastic. All right. Best advice, worst advice. We ask every single guest, what's the best security advice you can give us that you're hearing out there? Don't ask you for the worst, but let's start with the best. What's the best security advice you could give anybody to listen to this show?
I think when you're writing code, doing anything, scope. Keep small scope and do defensive programming. Like the biggest time is I've seen like a whoopsies or a security issue. The scope is a little too big. Somebody's like, oh, I'll just go touch this over here and fix this here. And it just was a little too much work. So just do defensive coding. And part of that is just keeping a very strict scope and don't be like, oh, well, while we're working on this, we could do a little bit more.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah, just keep it simple.
I love that. And what's the worst security advice you think you've ever heard?
I think just the classic old like, oh, well, we can just bypass all the processes and modify in production. Like just, yeah. I know actually for the Drupalgeddon example, that is technically what we did, but that was hey, we need to patch this within immediately as possible without doing a hot fix. But like, I think just anytime somebody says, oh, well, we can just skip the processes, it doesn't matter. That is like the worst security advice that can ever be said.
Yeah. That's bypass our own processes just in the sake of getting it done. Just get it to production. We'll fix it at security later.
Moving fast leads to mistakes. And I know we want to like sometimes having those roadblocks and bumps are there for a purpose because we think better when we slow down a little bit.
Absolutely. There's a reason you put the process in place.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, we're getting here at the end of the show. We always like to give our guests the final word. So if there's anything you want to plug, anywhere we can follow your adventures or any just bits of wisdom you want to part us with, the floor is yours.
If anybody's interested in following along, I have my blog, mglaman.dev, where I post various musings along the way in technical articles, or I'm on Blue Sky at mglaman. Just blogging away. Every time I find something interesting, I try to do a deep dive write-up because I want it there for my future self and also anybody else that hits that can go and read about it.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here. We'll put all those links down in the show notes. If you're doing Drupal out there, you better be using DrupalCheck to make sure that you are ready for the future. And thanks again for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.